Muy buenos días para todas y para todos. Les damos la bienvenida a este espacio académico donde nos convoca la reflexión y la posibilidad de construir juntos una educación más innovadora, pertinente y transformadora. Para dar inicio a este encuentro, invito a Liliana Restrepo Villa, vicerrectora administrativa de nuestra institución, para dar un saludo de bienvenida.
Muy buenos días para todos y para todas. Un saludo muy especial. El Laboratorio Global del Aprendizaje para Todos nace del anhelo profundo de transformar vidas, trascendiendo edades y contextos, para llegar a niños, niñas, adolescentes, jóvenes, adultos y personas mayores, a impactar cada una de sus vidas. Esta iniciativa representa mucho más que un esfuerzo educativo. Es una revolución creativa que abre caminos inéditos para el desarrollo humano integral a lo largo de toda la vida. Durante 87 años, nuestra institución de educación superior ha sido testigo y protagonista de innumerables historias de cambios. Hoy, fieles a nuestro legado, decidimos soñar en grande y construir juntos una comunidad de aprendizaje donde la innovación florece y donde cada persona puede desplegar todo su potencial. Sabemos que los sueños más ambiciosos solo se logran sumando talentos y voluntades. Por eso agradecemos profundamente a Claudia Urrea, referente mundial en educación y tecnología, quien desde el MIT, una de las instituciones más emblemáticas e innovadoras del planeta, nos inspira con su visión y con sus valiosos aportes. A todo su equipo para hacer realidad este Laboratorio Global del Aprendizaje para Todos. Hoy celebramos la fuerza de la colaboración y de la creatividad, convencidos que juntos lo lograremos, impulsados por la innovación. Podemos construir un futuro donde aprender sea una aventura para toda la vida. Les agradezco en nombre del rector Juan Pablo y de todo el equipo rectoral su presencia en nuestro campus y especialmente extiendo un saludo especial a nuestro expositor Vijay Kumar, quien en sus distintos roles ha procurado, tal cual lo pretende nuestro Laboratorio Global del Aprendizaje para Todos, promover la innovación educativa y la estrategia tecnológica. Bienvenidos y muchas gracias.
Como lo dijo la vice, hoy nos acompaña un invitado muy especial para el desarrollo de esta jornada. Es el doctor Ed.D. Vijay Kumar, una de las voces más influyentes a nivel mundial en innovación educativa y aprendizaje habilitado por la tecnología. El doctor Kumar es actualmente Senior Advisor para iniciativas globales en MIT Open Learning y ha dedicado más de 4 décadas a transformar la educación desde una visión abierta, accesible y humana. Durante sus 25 años de trabajo en Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT, ha liderado iniciativas pioneras como la Open Knowledge Initiative y ha sido asesor de organizaciones como UNESCO, la Comisión Nacional de Conocimiento de la India y Qatar Foundation International. Su enfoque abarca desde la educación básica hasta la universidad, promoviendo ecosistemas de aprendizaje que integran tecnología, equidad y sostenibilidad. Es además coeditor del libro Opening Up Education, publicado por MIT Press. Para Pascual Bravo es un privilegio contar con su presencia, su mirada global y sobre todo con su disposición para compartir conocimiento y experiencias que sin duda nos inspiran a seguir transformando nuestras prácticas pedagógicas. Démosle una cálida bienvenida al doctor Vijay Kumar.
Gracias. Buenos días. Good morning. It's a real pleasure. Thank you, distinguished guests, directors, my dear colleague Claudia, for including me in this wonderful experience. I am really thrilled delighted to be here. This is not my first time to Medellin, but has been the real trip, because last time she took me and hold me in a campus for 2 days. And this time I'm seeing how beautiful the city is. And thank you very much. I'm thrilled to be here to not only share my perspectives with you all, my bits of my experience, and most of all, the key word that I mentioned to the design group yesterday, most of all, my hope for the future. So I'm really thrilled about that. I'm thrilled to be have participated with that in what we all do, I believe, and I'll say more about that, which is trying to construct, co-design, create some preferred futures for learning. And we do that, and this is what I have done a lot of my life. We do that. I call myself an educational futurist by preparation and practice. But what we do as an education futurist, and I think we all are, is see how we can construct these preferred futures in context, but informed by research, informed by the science of learning, for instance, informed by the realities of our economy and ecology, the changing marketplace, the changing climate conditions, and so informed by all this and trying to create preferred things for things that will happen beyond us and remain sustainable beyond us and beyond the immediate present. So, and one of the things that we are also informed by, and this is the substance of a lot of our work, is technology. We are all informed by the affordances that technology brings, whether it is in the form of devices, software, hardware. And I want all of us to think very generously about the term technology and digital. It is hardware, software, AI, it is mechanisms, it's procedures, etc. And it brings in new capabilities, new affordances, and we bring all that in to imagine and implement preferred futures. And I'm very happy to join you in this exercise. So yesterday, for those of you might be wondering, we are engaging in a process of imagining and implementing an early childhood center or program. And one of the things that we did was lay out a lot of options, and this is what we do. And as I look back at my experience, it has been a journey of making strategic choices which direct either me or the institution or society in general towards transformation. And transformation not just for the sake of transformation, but transformation that will improve our state, that will make it better for us, either in terms of our learning experiences, in terms of social capital, in terms of the impact we have on society. But there are moments of choice, strategic choice, and there are moments that lead to strategic choices for transformation. And hence, I chose the title, Navigating Choice and Change, which is sort of the work that we do with educational innovation. And what I'm going to do is draw on elements of my past. And some of it you might find it boring. I always find my past fascinating. But draw on elements of my past and lay it as a foundation for thinking ahead of the future. There is a joke, for those of you who might be familiar with Americanisms, Yogi Berra was a famous baseball player with the Yankees. What you do in management science is, whenever you have something interesting to say and you don't know who to attribute to, you said Yogi Berra said so. So Yogi Berra had this thing about the future, which he says, the future ain't what it used to be. So it was a pretty profound statement, even coming from Yogi Berra. Essentially, it's saying that it's dynamic, it's changing. And so when I say a brief history, I can draw on all the past and try to see, are there some principles coming out of that? What have we learned? What are we learning? What have I learned that will inform my actions for the future? But keeping in mind that the future is going to constantly change, right? So I do want to tell you that I'm going to draw on elements of my own journey initially. I was chatting with Claudia before we came to Medellin, and she and I have done various sessions together, and she says, it's important to reflect on your own journey and as it informs this. So what and I find that my individual journey is quite intertwined with institutional engagement. So I'm going to give you a little picture of that, but it'll point to certain things that I think are important characteristics as we think about change, as we think about learning experiences for our, for generations and for institutional change. So I have a few pictures over here from the past, and this is not a comprehensive walk through all my past, but the first thing that you see over here, which will come up, I guess, as, is that the resolution thing? Sorry? Oh, beautiful. Thank you. So the, this side. Yeah. Thank you. So how many engineers does it take to get an image right? So you've seen the number. So this is a picture. So I did chemical engineering, just to give you a sense of my past. My undergraduate work is in chemical engineering. My master's work is in industrial management. I did a lot of operations research. And I'll come to my PhD in a second. But my bachelor's and master's I did in this place called the Indian Institute of Technology in Chennai in India. It's an excellent engineering institution over there. That's a picture of the campus. There's a thing called the Gajendra Circle, which is, elephants. Gaja means elephant. But it's a picture from the past. And we will imagine, it'll resolve itself. But the interesting thing, so why I point to this is I did chemical engineering, and one of the things that happened, and I'm going to date myself over here, is in my 4th year, we encountered an IBM 370 computer. And we were totally enamored, fascinated. Big, there was a whole center dedicated to the machine, card punching machines, and it was all those cards. And we went. And what would happen in our chemical engineering program, those days it was a 5-year engineering program, the last year you did a project which was worth 18 credits. So it was like a make and break. If you were sort of floating around a first class or first division, if you did the project well, you sewed up, the project mattered. And about 12 of us chose not to do a chemical engineering project, but chose to work with the IBM 370. So we had to do a lot of finagling. We had to talk, beg, plead, and say, oh, this is good. But they allowed us to do it, and that's the important part. And it was very interesting because although it was chemical engineering, my project, and those of you who knows, it was some things that have become very, very important now. It was in probabilistic methods, something called Markov analysis, to predict things, right? And I had some gratuitous connection to chemical engineering, but they allowed me to do it, and it opened up my mind. So, wow, there is this package, this package, this package. In fact, my wife, who's a real computer scientist, I was trying to date her at that time. I was trying to impress with all the stuff about computing that I was learning from all this. And it worked because I'm still married to her. But the thing is that it opened up my mind, and that's one part of it. But the important thing, and my chair said, they allowed me to stick my neck out. They said, okay, take the risk. This is a new thing. They allowed me to do it. And they did not do any much hand-holding and stuff. I think they created enough scaffolding, enough confidence to make sure that I did not fail in that enterprise, or if I failed, that I was able to pick up and go, right? And I think that was the most important part of it, the fact that they allowed me to stick my neck out, take that risk, and that's a tendency that stays over time, and go into another field with what I knew, with foundational education. The second thing that I did when I did industrial management, there were a lot of OR techniques, and typically people who do operations research for industry, they'll be saying, how many more gaskets can we produce with this? It's optimization like that. what I got very interested in education. So I said, look, I want to apply these quantitative techniques for resource planning for education. So I actually argued and fought with the institute with the support of my advisor. And that's important, to say, give me data so that I can show these models of prediction of resource requirements so that you can have a rational model for the allocation of budget at the institute, et cetera, right? So it was taking these techniques and applying it to domain that I had started to care about. Okay, yeah, right. And which was education. So, and saying, look, you can take these techniques, these tools, this technology, and come up with models that, A, for things that interest you, two, where they might, okay. I hope you have 15 of those because you have. So anyway, so that was, so the point of, and I'll move on from that place. I'll move away from India in a second. The point was, A, they allowed me to stick my neck out. B, it's coming, it's resolving. Don't worry, I'll move. Yeah, there it is. Everyone please memorize this picture. So that I can, so the, okay, so those are the two important things. You can take things from here, apply it there, apply it there, apply it there, do stuff that matters to you. Two, you have a body of people, and this is a very tough engineering institution. If you read about the IITs, you'll find out these were primo institutions. I went to the German one, but the fact that allowed me to stick my neck out. The second, so then we came away, I won't tell you all the stories, we formed consulting cooperatives. I came to the United States to do my PhD. Now my PhD was not in engineering or management, it was in future studies in education. Now, and you know, because I'd started, we had formed a consulting cooperative, and one of my friends said, Vijay, you're always talking about the future. In the company we had started, I went to USAIS, I was reading about the World Future Society magazine, and getting very interested in this. But I was interested in future studies in education. At that time, in the United States, there were only 2 schools where future studies was not in the School of Business or Management. One was at UMass Amherst, second was in Minnesota, University of Minnesota. I got my, now with UMass Amherst, and I have the picture. Have you all heard about Buckminster Fuller? Anybody has heard about Buckminster Fuller? Right, so I would urge you to do a Google search, look him up. He's a futurist, he's a primo thinker. You know, you see these geodesic domes, you know, the tetrahedral domes, that was his idea, his creation, because it was the most, not only the most stable structure, but the same where you can have maximum volume for minimum square footage. So they're used for creating housing, creating nets. Architects will recognize that. But he was also, in the 80s, writing about education automation and global networks of education. Now, in the UMass Future Studies program, we had Bucky Fuller, you know, and you'll hear this. I would urge you really to go look up the kinds of things that he's done, because he will talk about how the atlases, the maps of the Earth that we look are actually not accurate because of the distance between the continents. So there are different, you know, you hear about the Mercator projection versus the Dymaxion projection. All that came from this gentleman who was an architect, you know, from his thinking. And he was on the board. You might have heard about Alvin Toffler, who wrote Future Shock. Toffler was on the board, so you had this advisory board for this future studies program. And from India, I could barely type. I was writing to them and communicating with them. And of course, my I-20, all those things happened. So I didn't go to Minnesota. I came to this future studies program over here. And the important thing about the future studies program was, at that time, and I'm talking about the 80s, the mid-80s, we were talking about soft energy paths. Most of the work that I was doing was on social political structures for imagining educational futures. So Freud, Marx, looking at sexism, feminism, racism, how it affected. Then, I have to tell you at that time, sometimes a joke that half my class were Peace Corps volunteers, the other half were radical feminists. You know, this was my PhD class. But it was very interesting. You got exposed to all these ideas. And that is how one of my advisors, and I was talking with Emily yesterday, he took me over to MIT because he started introducing me to the ideas of Claudia's guru, Seymour Papert, who at that time was talking about logo, constructivism, and there was a course on thinking about thinking. I came, and that was my entry, and there were people like Minsky who were talking about AI in education at that time, right? This is pre-machine learning. And so my entry into educational technology was not as a technologist, but as someone who was thinking about the future of education. So this is a message that I want to leave, because leave you all with also, which is, as we are thinking about digital affordances, AI, and all these complex things, not to forget that the thing that we're all striving for is better quality learning, but better quality learning for all. And we are trying to see how can we bring all these things into place. And that was, I think, imagining possible futures to do that. So that was the Future Studies program story. There's a very important thing. On the door of the Future Studies program, there was a bumper sticker which said, a futurist is not one who predicts the future. A futurist is one who makes future possibilities more real for others. That's what we do as educators, teachers, educational planners. We make future preferred possibilities more real for others. So yesterday when we were sitting and doing a co-design exercise, or tomorrow when we do that, what we are doing is actually operating as futurists doing that. So that's the thing. When I was during the PhD, I got this opportunity, and I was talking about systems, etc. Texas Instruments, who used to make a lot of these devices, Speak and Spell, and USAID, I got the opportunity to be a consultant to go to Africa, to Lesotho. And what I did was use these devices and teach logo. At that time, the entire documentation for logo was 2 pages, cyclo-style pages from the Media Lab, from this thing. But I taught logo to kids over there in elementary school. And the idea was to introduce this in various schools, thinking about active learning, reading, writing, arithmetic through logo. And I used that project as a basis for my dissertation, which is on systemic planning, which is really for the diffusion of technological innovations for education in developing countries. So planning, it was a planning dissertation based on that field study in Africa, where I worked with the kids in Lesotho and the teachers. Now, the lessons from there are evergreen. Those are lessons we all think about. The biggest lesson is invention is different from innovation. It's not that gadget, it's not the toy, it's not that software that really matters. That's the first reason why people consider something. But everything else that happens around it and after that is what matters. Context is what matters, right? Over there, simple things like, we had USAID, we had all this, African National Development Bank, etc., batteries. The minute our team left, will there be batteries to run those devices in the Lesotho schools? Was there enough road infrastructure to take these devices from school to school, etc.? So those became, do the teachers like it? Are the politicians against it? Are the parents balking against it? So the whole innovation diffusion dissertation of mine was saying, okay, that was a field study. The scores were good. The scores improved for math and learning, etc. But is it really a sustainable diffusion? Can it make change? So that was, and all these things have informed not only my thinking, but they become part of how we start thinking about education planning, education for change in the large, for sustainability, which is why I thought I'd lean on these stories. The last one, of course, is I'll quickly pass to, only to tell you. So I went to Maine to work. I'd finished my PhD, I'd done a couple of trips to Zimbabwe, etc., for various projects. And I needed a job. This came up. And Machias, that place, I had not heard of before. Now, Maine, for those of you who think there is one United States, there isn't. Maine is a very large state, quite poor in many places, very poor. In fact, I was a professor there. My colleague faculty, their summer jobs was raking blueberries and digging for clams. So, right? I mean, this is right? And so that's Maine, and very geographically challenging. So one of the things that I I had the real privilege of participating in was helping to design and scope an interactive telecommunication system amongst the 7 campuses of the system, right? So connectivity, and it's very interesting, some things that you find out. You would think that a rural state with that much poverty and, et cetera, was, people were very technology averse. To the contrary, technology was a part of their lives. In their culture, every house had a scanner. They all knew what their neighbors were doing. They'd share information. So, so the culture accepted technology very easily. So when we proposed this, it was more selling it to the institutions that was difficult than selling it to the community, right? And that became a very, very important part because, we had to raise bond issues and so on and so forth. But it was cut out because that small campus was an extension campus where 76% of the students were non-traditionally aged women who had to come distances, etc. So it was poor, so we could share resources. So the case for bringing in this technology was made through the contextual realities of the place, and then the place came onto the national map. And I point out, because it is a very, very telling moment to think technology works in context for different situations in wonderful ways. If you get the community consensus around it, if you're able to create a real purpose that people buy into it, and of course raise the money and resources. Annenberg CPB funded it. So I will allow this to connect and then move on. So that story happened. I'm done with Maine, and the train has left Maine, so to speak now, and I'm shortcutting a lot of stuff. I went afterwards to work at Mount Holyoke College, and I'll say a little bit after that, and then came to MIT, where I had as director of academic computing. And this is something, MIT is a very fertile environment for educational technology innovation. And this is just a sprinkling of projects, and you can see they're all over. X-Tutor was like an online tutor, which the now Chancellor of MIT, Eric Grimson, created then, which became the engine that drove the edX platform. There were things about remote labs. Jesus de Alamos, a colleague of ours, created something called Real Virtual Labs, where you could open a browser and control real labs around the places. I will talk about some of these. But there was a whole bunch of education technology initiatives, some directed towards the infrastructure, some directed towards deeper learning in some subjects, some directed towards bringing outside learners in. And this was the environment that I was part of creating over there. Real had the fortune. What I walked into was to really, I inherited something that is a very major project called Athena, which became a model for distributed computing around the world. Now, I'm going to say something, and I want you to think about all these things, and I hope this will come up in Q&A. Athena was built on the premise that people said that, look, if you give students lots of computational horsepower, great things will happen. And this is the 80s, mind you. Give them 1 million bits, 1 megabytes, transfer, etc. And if you give them lots of technology, great things will happen for education. So, and you have to distribute it, you have to manage it. And we used to run the entire thing on give open, there was, it was entirely open and secure. It became a model, and it derived on projects from Digital Equipment Corporation, Carnegie Mellon, file systems came. The user interface that you see on the Macintosh came out as a product of Project Athena. X Windows came, which launched as a consortium. So it really seeded a lot of innovation that affected. But there is a debate still on whether it was a technological innovation or an educational innovation. It facilitated a lot, but a focus was a lot on technology, and part of my job was to shift that focus into saying, look, we really have to keep on thinking about better education, better learning, right? So that was the Athena. And I'll come up, when I came in there, and I'm walking into the territory of strategic choices for change. When I came in there, this was a time, as you can see, there was a lot going on. If you read that, there was a lot going on in the environment, So where people are saying, what is the role of the campus? Because suddenly the internet was coming on, and people were doing some, there was Gopher and some early days of Netscape, etc. and people, what is the role of the campus? Why should people come over here? Then are we, as an institution, only serve the people coming over here? What are the people, what about the learners out there? There was another thing that was going on in the United States at that time. There were few campuses, Columbia, Chicago, and Stanford, who were commercializing their content. They said, you know, we have all this educational content. We can create the equivalent of content.com. And there's a whole, not just revenue stream, it's a way of sort of expanding the university's business. And it was thriving. So something called UNext was formed by Chicago and Stanford. Something called Fathom was created by Columbia. And our leaders, my president at that time, whom I dearly, dearly loved, Charles West, and my provost, I was the assistant provost then, Bob Brown, they said, and they were asking the faculty community, saying, folks, those guys are doing that, those guys are doing that. Have you missed the train? Have you missed the boat? What is it that we should be doing to leverage the opportunities that the internet presents for learning? And a lot of discussion. We did what academics do best. We talked a lot and argued, and we used words like, in MIT there are some, Claudia has a couple of degrees from MIT. She will identify with this. There are a couple of words that we use a lot. Intensity. What characterizes MIT? Intensity. Then we use terms like drinking from the fire hose, because there's so much information coming at you. And he said, yeah, but what does that really mean? What is the essential quality of good learning at MIT? And at that time, I'm talking about 1998, our faculty colleagues said, look, the essential quality of excellence at MIT is a very high bandwidth of interaction between great students and great faculty. We spend a lot of time and energy in recruiting great faculty who are researchers, etc. We spend a lot of effort getting the best students from around the world to come over here and to facilitate their interaction, their contact, sort of saying education is a contact sport. And we are a research institution. Okay, let's own up that we are a research. So we want to bring the practice, the joy, the tools of research into learning, education learning. That's our value proposition. And at that time, we said, and the institute had and this is a strategic choice, humility, to say at that time, those things that we care about, we only know how to do in face-to-face incidents. You have to be here, we have to have the labs here, we have to do this, right? So we said the only thing, the institute said, the only thing that we can do honestly and meaningfully to address the needs of the world is take a picture of that and publish it and share it over the world. And that was the birth, as I'll say, of OpenCourseWare. That was a very big, I'm going to come to that. And this was, so because, to say that we'll only publish all this stuff, the content of every course that we have, all the interactions, the assessments, the exchanges, etc., we'll publish it. But it's a publishing event. And I'll repeat this again later on, which is to say, when OpenCourseWare went out, we say we'll give away the content of all of MIT courses to the world for free for educational purposes. But remember, that's not an MIT education. The MIT education you get when you come over here. So we used to have a thing underneath which said, this is a publishing of MIT courses, not an MIT education. But that was a sort of an important strategic choice. And you have to realize that there were, what I'm short-circuiting over here, that there were various councils and committees which said what should be, given technology, given all that is coming on, what should be the various things that MIT can become to leverage the internet, to leverage technology, to respond to the new needs. And we came up with a lot of scenarios, okay? And here are some of the scenarios. And what I'm trying to do is expose this strategic sort of choice-making process for the institution, right? And we said, okay, we can have lots of, can you see that screen, you all? Probably not. So, oh, you have it over here. So, said, well, we could be a lifelong thing, the forever tech, lifelong extended community. That was one vision. Okay, we can be a very, very technology-centric. So these are projections of the various choice alternatives that our councils came up at that time in the face of the opportunities presented by the internet. Flex tech, global tech, tech. And it was look at the venture, create joint ventures with other top universities. And I will tell you, to this day, some of those options are being exercised. These are not mutually exclusive options, but we have to decide what do we want to do first at that time, then subsequently various things that have come up. So this was a sort of the strategic choice making for what is best for MIT to do honestly, and so that it can have maximum impact. Here are the options, and let's pick a few. And then the projects and initiatives that followed were manifestations of some of these kind of visions, right? Then we had started working with consultants. So we worked with McKinsey and Booz Allen Hamilton, and there was a lot of inquiry. We said, okay, here we are. This was called the Council on Education Technology. This is, it was chaired by the provost. I was the executive officer. We were the planning group. But we said, look, we are talking, it's all good, we're getting faculty inputs, but we really need to talk to the whole community, the faculty and the students. So what do you really care about? What are you about? So we could cull out some values. What does MIT think it is? Who does it think? What does it want to keep? What does it want to preserve? And these were some of the beliefs that came up at that time. And if you look at that, it says, look, we are talking about contact, being great students and faculty together. Research and teaching are intertwined. There's no research, public service and teaching separate. It's single class faculty, single class activities, student interactions matter. So once you recognize, it was important first to surface that, articulate that, and embody that, because it shaped the kinds of projects that we selected, funded, the partnerships that we created with industry, etc. after that. So at that time, coming out of these, I'll talk about 2 or 3 initiatives that came out that reflected this. One was already I've told you about open courseware. We said, look, we'll publish everything, we'll give everything away, but that's not MIT education. You have to come over here for that. Then we launched, and I was very happy last week, just before leaving, we got a message from Central IT saying that our learning management system, original old one, Stellar, was being retired. That's 25 years later. Stellar was my first big project, which I helped create because of a relationship with Singapore MIT Alliance. We needed a learning management system. And we needed one. At that time, there were places, some of you might remember, Blackboard was a very big LMS at that time. And we said, well, we want autonomy for our faculty. We want the freedom to choose different applications, etc. So we went about building our own, and that was Stellar, which is now being retired. There are some very good products nowadays. Canvas everybody uses, and so on. But the project that we launched as an underlying architecture, and this was my baby, was OKI, the Open Knowledge Initiatives. Now I got to tell you, we talk about strategic choices and stuff. The Mellon Foundation, so they funded this. They said, Vijay, I was in a board, and this thing, they said, we want you to create an open source learning management system. So I talked to my colleagues, one of whom I just recruited from Stanford, and they said, look, if you search the internet, there are 1,300 open source learning management systems. I don't want to build another one. What we'd like to build is an architecture so that regardless of which ones you choose, they can talk to each other. So as a faculty member, as you say, I like this one or this particular assessment tool or that particular, I want to use that, but I want to make sure that either the people who support the system or the students who benefit from other enterprise services, they don't suffer. So we had to create an architecture and so that you could have interoperability. That was OKI. So rather than making an open source LMS, we created specifications, etc., and made that open so that people could build applications that's enabling the ecosystem to serve your priorities, right? And that was, and it all came out of recognizing who we were, what we cared for, how could we make sure that the technologies that we select, the education initiatives that we reflected that. So the strategy that we came out based on all those values, essentially you say at that time, you say, look, we want to create innovative learning environments, which means if you want contact, MIT believes a lot in active learning. Our motto is mens et manus, mind and hand, right? So active learning, doing, we say doing is learning, doing science is learning science, etc. So the standard joke was, and I'll point, there was a physics, you know, all the introductory courses at MIT used to be conducted in these huge classrooms. You know, one popular classroom was 10 to 50, where the instructor will be somewhere way up there. There are, you know, 400 students sitting in a tiered classroom. Everything looked like distance education because, you know, and we're, you know, and part of us were saying, look, you know, we're talking about active learning and high bandwidth of interaction between students and faculty. That doesn't look like interaction when there's some teacher out there and then, you know, way up there and thousands of people sitting there. We want to, and then they're just listening, talking, sort of almost like passive lecture like this. We want to move away from that. We want to do projects. We want to share our resources. And we want to recognize that we want to work with other institutions in useful partnerships. That was the intention. And then see how can we serve learners who might not be able to make it, even if partly only. So let's say they have to go away, right? So the extended university community might not just be students at a distance, but let's say students have to go away for a project or to have to go away for internship. How can they stay connected with the community, with the MIT community? So the projects that came out of it was there. We launched, this was the heyday of education technology. We had projects with Microsoft Research called iCampus, which supported a lot of these projects. Our alumni gave funds. We gave funds and grants to our faculty to launch projects, but they were all built on these things, which were our principles over there, right? One particular project I want to tell you which reflects this whole business of moving away from passive lectures to active environments, to moving it to active learning. Have you all encountered this term TEAL? Okay, TEAL stands for Technology-Enabled Active Learning, right? A couple of things. The gentleman over there, Professor John Belcher, he is the one who came out with the naming and the big project. Now, what TEAL said, how an introductory physics course is something every student has to do, okay? Which means you have to serve large numbers, right? So, which is why you're doing the last lectures. But at the same time, you're saying, I want interaction, I want hands-on. So how can you balance the efficiency of teaching large numbers of people at a time, which you have to, with the effectiveness that comes with small group interactive experiences? The TEAL project was born. So if you come to visit to MIT, and please take this as an invitation, if you're passing through, come. There are any number of people who will talk, show you TEAL, the pedagogy, the spaces. And so if you walk into the room, there are round tables. The students sit around the table. The introductory course is one in electromagnetism. They do the experiments. They argue with each other. And the lecturer is giving the lecture, but he's moving or she is moving from table to table, interacting. So the students are working, they're conversing, and if there are, and they do the experiments, and if there are, magnetism is always difficult to understand, there are visualizations that were created that are on the screens, on the walls. So it's a technology-enabled space for active learning, but it balances the efficiency and the effectiveness. That's a TEAL room, and it has become a model in various places. I want to point out why it's important for us to have interinstitutional collaboration. The idea of active learning, the studio-based physics, studio-based teaching was not born at MIT. In fact, I remember taking John to Rensselaer Polytechnic, where their chief of innovation at that time, Jack Wilson, was doing studio calculus. And he looked at it and says, wow, how can I adapt that idea to teach our introductory courses, and that's how TEAL was formed. He went and looked at several institutions. So that was one example. Similarly, modularity, how can we modularize, not just to break it up, because of a purpose. Can I do modules around concepts which travel across courses? Can I make it more flexible for different kinds of learners? So all of these experiments and projects that we did, which have now become a part of how we do education at MIT, were born out of those kinds of principles, experiments that we funded in modularity in various subjects, learned from it, and moved it along, right? So how are you all doing? Well, are you still with me? Okay, so let's go to another century. So we have come, and now we are in the mid-2000s, right, around 2012. And you know what's happening. Everyone talking digital centrality, this thing. And we're all watching this. And this is MIT. Lots of technology is being done. You know, simulations, visualizations, all that stuff is going on. And we said, look, there's something that's happening over here. And as I was telling you, what it is isn't exactly clear, right? Digital is becoming very, very central. It's no longer at the edge, right? It is, and so the president, Rafael, at that time, Rafael, right? What he did was he launched a task force, right? And in fact, one of the people who created open learning, this thing, Sanjay Sharma, was one of the people who was, facilitating this task force. The task force role was to say, look, in how we have to look at the future of MIT education with this digital centrality in mind. In fact, one of our colleagues, friends, who's now the president of Brandeis, he wrote a letter saying, what you guys are doing at MIT is moving the university from being a mechanical university to a digital university. But we have to understand what that meant. So these task forces were launched saying, look, what does this mean for how do we teach and learn? What does it mean for how we interact with the world outside? And when I say that, it's not about doing international programs. World outside, how does MIT interact with community colleges? How does it interact with the pre-K through 12 sector? How does it interact with other institutions and industry? Okay, given this new affordance of digital centrality. And then, what does this mean to the business of education? Because remember, classroom utilization changes because of technology, some capital investments change, some shift, some places you need more people. So let us think about systemically, what does it mean for how we teach and learn, how we interact with the world, and what it means for the business of education. So that was a task force that came out to make strategic choices. And one of the things that came out of that was things like the MOOCs, like MIT X saying we'll put our courses online. edX was coming up, and you saw thousands of MIT X courses, the numbers. So that started happening. But we just didn't want to do it and sort of say, oh my God, this is happening upon us. We wanted to sort of be methodical and take, to the extent possible, to be able to shape it, to say, is this still aligned with our priorities, with who we think we are? Do we need to make corrections so that we don't stray away from not just our mission and purpose, but the values, because then it'll become unsustainable. You'll do it for some time and you'll move on, okay? And that does damage to the whole educational culture, so to speak. So we started looking at learning. A lot of things came out of that. For instance, in open learning, when open learning was launched, there was a large initiative. We said, look, we really have to look deeply. Digital is not just about technology. We have to learn. There's lots of 100 years of research on learning about learning, on the science of learning, influenced by brain science, cognitive science. NSF had launched a whole initiative on discipline-based education research. Claudia and I launched help open learning pull together something called the Online Educational Policy Initiative to say, what does this mean in terms of future staff, the institution, what should institutional policies be? Even went and took the results of that to the National Science Foundation to say, look, you better start thinking as a country about this. So the integrated science of learning, and which told us many, many things, like, for instance, it told us that short videos were important, frequent formative testing was important for better learning, and we had results to prove it. And what we saw was that Some of this was known, some of this was buried, we had to surface, but the digital was a way of being able to implement what we learn about good learning at scale. And a simple example, you take frequent formative testing. We all know it's good because you give immediate feedback, people change, that way more people succeed in learning, we have results. You can do that with 4 people in a class. You can do that 40, you can't do it with 400. Technology helps, AI helps. This is where frequent formative. So digital became a way of implementing what we have learned about good learning from the learning sciences, but implementing it at scale and being able to change rapidly. So it was going to this thing. So if you looked at an online course, let's say on edX, there's a 6-minute video, right? Because you learned about attention spans, about forgetting curves, immediately followed by some worked example, followed by some frequent testing with feedback. So it was not because somebody thought it was a cute idea, because it was informed by the science of learning. So this is the part. So that's a strategic choice which says that my choices about what I construct, the learning experience that I construct and promote, are going to be informed by what I know from research about learning, from research about the context. There were many things, but I'll tell you, it's unfinished business. There is so much more to do. Yesterday, I was giving an example. For instance, when the first edX course was launched, there were 2 people, Anant Agarwal and Jerry Sussman, who were doing this course, and there were, 10,000 people. So we thought it was 2 instructors negotiating with 10,000 students. That was really not true. 600 communities had formed. Some Hispanic communities, some people who are strong in math. So it was a one-to-many communities interaction, communities talking to each other. So we hadn't designed the experience we still haven't done it. We have a lot of data, but in fact, we did a white paper for NSF. We have a lot of data to understand how people are learning in groups, how are they forming these communities. We have all kinds of data, page-turning data, bitstream data, all that stuff. We can look at it and form. But so this is, these are some of the things about the choices. Then something that we're all proud of, you heard reference to in the introduction. So we helped launch something called the Jameel World Education Lab in Open Learning. Now, remember I told you there were 3 things. There's how do you do better learning? How does the business of education change? And how do we interact with the outside world? The World Education Lab was a manifestation of how we engage with the world outside. We said, we will bring our pedagogical innovations, our pedagogical research, teaching research, practices, our experience, and share it with a community. So we convene communities, we call them members of the lab, so that we could say, look, this is what we are doing under these circumstances, and this is how it's working. Now we'll sit with you to co-design, co-construct solutions for your context based on this. Right? So that was what the Jameel World Education Lab did. And we said we'll look at the spectrum from pre-K through 12 education, which is all of Claudia's thing, to higher education, to professional education. So look at the whole spectrum of these things. And that is what we did. And in various ways, the kinds of engagements we are having here are all expressions of that kind of work. How can we bring what we know to bear on and to work with others to address priorities, problems, opportunities in that context? So that was the World Education Lab. And many initiatives, we are very, very proud. We work with Save the Children for teacher education, for refugee education, refugee teachers in Syria. Los Angeles engineering curriculum was changed through, through the work that we did. Many, many initiatives that I can point to. Claudia and team launched STEAM camps that were implemented in various places that have become parts of schools that they're designing and implementing right now. A project that I'm particularly proud about is a project in India that we did with 1,100 schools, rural schools, 1,100 rural schools, government schools. The government schools in India are very poor, very under-resourced, and this was in 4 states. For those of you who do not know, India is a very complex place. 4 states means at least 4 languages, probably 40 dialects. So, different governments. So we worked with the support of the Tata Trust, Ratan Tata, who's a very big industrialist. And it was grades 8 through 12, English, science, math, right? But what we brought to 1,100 schools, I think with 800, somewhere 850 schools, we had tremendous impact. The Tata Institute for Social Sciences in Mumbai, was our partner. They did most of the heavy lifting there. And working with them, they've created a teacher professional development program that still lives based on the kinds of practices. We had folks come in to do co-design curriculum. And what we actually did was lead with what we believed in active learning. India has great curriculum, but our observation was there was too much rote learning. There were great textbooks. For instance, a physics textbooks would have there'll be an inset which would be an activity. But we saw nobody was doing the activity. So we brought in games, different kinds of things to make, to sort of enliven the activity. We brought our practices and juxtaposed them on the existing curriculum. And that has become a model that is giving inputs into India's, the National Education Program now. So that was the CLICS project. I'm very proud to say that we got the UNESCO award for the best ICT in education project for that one in 2017, 18. And many things, boot camps were launched because suddenly we say, what we learn from learning science, what we're learning from online education, we can actually do hybrid experiences, not just for simple things. When we need to do skills development, professional development for deep tech, we can do boot camps where people did a lot of the learning through online courses that are available, then met for 2 weeks for intensive work activity, right? And we could do hybrid experiences like that. So that came out of that phase, which is a very good inflection point, the task force, and we made that. And then, this slide, by the way, is a slide I used to use to do presentations of our work till about 4 years ago. And during COVID, and I find that that slide is still valid. And now I'm taking us to the last part, which is about today and the future. Now, this is something I don't have to tell you about. This is something we all encountered in a life, right? We were invited to turn on Microsoft's translation service. It could have been in your earbuds. That's happening automatically. You think about things like Uber and Ola. We call them ride-share services. They're actually software services, right? The digital centrality and AI's centrality is becoming very, very, in some cases, very obvious, and in some cases so embedded that it's not even obvious, but it's there. But it's changing the nature. And the most potent example of why this matters was given to me by an MIT alum, Michael Saylor, who once said, Vijay, when we studied geography, we looked at atlases, we looked at maps, right? They became 1 million images on Google Earth. Now, it's an intelligent service on my watch. So every hard product is transitioning to become an intelligent soft service. What are the implications for what we teach, for the skills, for what we learn? So that's this progression. That's the push, that's the contextual reality. And then meanwhile, we see what's happening with the climate, right? So the contextual reality in the economy and the ecology is that we have learned from our experiences from learning science, et cetera. Now we have to compose learning experiences, learning programs that mean. And there are 2 dimensions there which I call the demand dimensions. The first one we just talked, agility and competencies for the new economy, for the new ecology. And we say agility because it's a moving landscape, right? The second thing that we really, and yesterday in some of our design things, we were talking about this, there's a whole new generation of non-traditional learners. Not just because we have opened the gates for people, distance education and this thing, not just because typically, there are millennials and Gen X and so on. There are a lot of people who are trapped in jobs where need the next level of skills, or they want to migrate to the next job, So your non-traditional learners are those learners who are looking at career change, who are returning gig workers, they're undertrained, underemployed, etc. I like to say, and it's not just the Syrian refugees, I like to say this whole new cadre of learners, non-traditional learners, are both locationally challenged and vocationally challenged. They do not know how to navigate these changes. And this is that's the contextual demand reality for whom we are building. And that is today's landscape, right? It's not just the labor market, it's the whole human resource pool, right? And we know how AI's economy, there's enough reports written, and this is something from the IMF. This is already quite dated, but enough of a number to make us take note. 40% of global employment is exposed to AI, 60% of jobs in advanced economies impacted by AI, 67% expect their organizations to invest more in AI for the next 5 years, right? Every time I look at numbers like that, I look at pictures like this, and I talk to people, and even for me, it says, oh my God, this is daunting. How are we ever going to respond to this? And then is when I become a TV salesman, and I said, don't worry, we have good things on the supply side. We have all the stuff, the affordances of AI, of technology, and every aspect. This is why I say, when you say digital technology, think generously. It's your laptop, it's your tablet, it's your AI, it's your ChatGPT, it's your Gemini, whatever those tools are. It's your network, it's your high bandwidth networks. The other part that we have in our arsenal is what we're learning about learning that allows us to direct different kinds of things to different kinds of people. And the open movement, which says, look, you can share, you can give away content, you can collaborate and put away. There are legal regimens like Creative Commons, but you can share, so you don't have to operate from a notion of scarcity. I'm vested in the open movement, this thing. And open was, because you have to give it away to keep it, but the premise over here is that the operating model is one of abundance, not of scarcity. Right? So that movement is there. And then now, part of that abundance is also the ecosystem. We don't have to do everything ourselves. We partner with industry, we partner with schools. When you say, if this is the learning pathway, some of these things and at MIT, I tell these people, we care about hands-on learning and doing projects. Great, you don't have to abandon your passion for that, but you might not be the best person to deliver that. The students can go for an internship in industry and get that experience. So leveraging the ecosystem. So all these things we have on the supply side of the equation, but the question we have to ask and contend with is our organization prepared, and are our learners prepared to negotiate, navigate this new reality into the future? Clearly, we need to equip our organizations to respond and leverage this. And the thing is, it cannot be done as an afterthought. This is not finishing school business. You've studied, and then we'll sprinkle some AI on top of your learning, or sprinkle some job skills on top. It has to be intrinsically integrated into the learning process. And so we launched a lot of initiatives at MIT to do the preparation. In the K through 12 realm, there's a very important, I urge you all to go look at it. It's called RAISE, Responsible AI for Social Empowerment, okay? And this was launched by a colleague of ours, Professor Cynthia Brazil, who is an expert on social robotics, right? We've all worked, Claudia, ourselves, and there are various initiatives under the umbrella, but this is to bring foundational AI knowledge as well in a contextually relevant way through applications, not sacrificing what we believe about active learning, and developing curriculum elements, etc., which are shared quite widely through programs like the Day of AI, etc. So that's one initiative for that end, which is the early, I shouldn't say early, K through 12 part of the portion. In fact, the things that highlight the fact that we're still sticking to our beliefs, our knittings. So we say, look, you have to develop the whole learner. It's not just about learning the tools and techniques and the technologies. You have to inculcate an understanding of context, of ethics in the curriculum, in the learning about technology, because you're trying to create citizens for this new world, this very AI-centric world, right? So, and most important, and this is something, I was talking about you behind your back, okay? But the thing is, there are some things that are very, very important to understand. You can use a lot of fancy terms to describe an MIT education. There are two constants: agency, action. The learner comes, the student comes out, they say, I can do this, I can impact this. I might not have the right answer, but I'm not going to run away from it. They feel empowered to act, and I will act. They will build solutions, they build products, right? So all that is there. So this whole business of being co-creators and responsible citizen. So there's foundational knowledge, and there is this. So one of the initiatives, which is an old initiative under the RAISE umbrella, is something called App Inventor that a colleague of ours, Hal Abelson, first launched it when he was on sabbatical in Google. Now it's been at MIT for quite some time. And there are millions. If you go look up, you see the 21.1 million? That's the number of, I think on that day, when I took this snapshot, there were so many users using it on that day. Totally, there are 100.8 million users using App Inventor, and there is a big double-digit number of million projects that have been created by kids using App Inventor. But the thing that I want you to notice over here, so all this is under the RAISE umbrella, is some of the comments that are there. The left-hand side, see the projects that they do, group of young women from Moldova building a crowdsourcing app to help residents. This is access to safe drinking water, Chennai to address the flood situation, right? Then helping elderly folks, that was a Hong Kong app. So notice that these are kids developing applications for problems that they see they're affected by and that they care about, right? They're learning, they learn the tools, technology, etc., but it's in the context of what they care about and doing stuff and creating real things. In fact, Hal says that our kids are the most underutilized human resource that we have. We think, they just want to do toys. No, they want to solve real problems. But then if you look at some of the statements under the thing, says, before App Inventor, I was a user of technology. I accessed it as in internal cafes, and that was it. But afterwards, my mindset changed from user to developer. That's agency. That's the kind of stuff. Similarly over here, recognizing that this is not just something you play with, but this could be her profession downstream that will be part of the profession. These are the kinds of shifts that have, that we try to bring about. So then that's on the K through 12 realm. What we have launched more recently is something called Universal AI. We have a new leader in open learning, Dimitris Bertsimas, who's a professor, very well known to those of you who might be familiar with operations research, some of the seminal books and so on. So Universal AI has been launched as a platform, and the intent is to provide a set of foundational courses, and application-based courses that are universally available. So there are foundational modules to teach AI fluency, and this is higher education, professional education, and a whole bunch of vertical modules that are being created, some of which are being launched. In fact, come mid-August is the Train the Trainer program. Come September, the initial pilots are being launched with a set of institutions and companies. One of the primary areas is healthcare because of Dimitris' own familiarity with the space and because of a strong interest. So this is being offered. I would urge you to look at it because there are ways in which people can take advantage of courses. My point over here is we look at it and say, look, here's a strategic choice we are making about engaging with the world outside in bringing contemporary knowledge, contemporary practice to bear on education. So these are the offerings that are created. So, now the thing is there are lectures by MIT faculty, the usual set of things, guided exercises, but it also comes with an AI tutor which guides the learner through various processes. So this is the package. So so what I've done is saying, look, we've seen all that, we made choices, we moved from there to over here. So sometimes when I see what does this new landscape look like, and here's a snapshot, and this is a landscape which is described entirely through the lens of some technology-enabled initiatives at MIT. You know, things that have to do with virtual reality for teacher training, for instance, introducing prior situations before teachers go into class. It looks at things like distributed credentials, right? It looks like initiatives like RAISE, a particular initiative that I will talk about, something that Claudia and her team launched called Full Steam Ahead, distributing STEAM resources around the world. So this is the landscape of technology-enabled initiatives. Now, remember I had shown you an old picture when we started, lots of EdTech projects. This is today's version, where we are, and which points to the possibilities for today and for the future. What it really says is there's an opportunity here to do lots of things that we're doing in better ways, in new ways, perhaps more efficient ways. There's also the opportunity to do things that we were not able to do, get to learners that we were not able to reach before. So this is a sort of the macro picture of the opportunity. I bring this in because this is one of the kinds of opportunities, and I want you to think about this. This is not an MIT initiative, although the person who launched this initiative supported JWL for 4 years. This is a AI-based platform, so which is, first of all, it's not like ChatGPT. It's not very data-driven. So the bias and stuff, it's a linguistic-based model. But here's the thing. Let us say I have your resume, I have your transcript, I have your LinkedIn profile, okay? This engine will go and extract your competencies from that, saying these are the competencies that you have. Then on the other side, on the labor market side, you have, Monster and so on, Burning Glass. There are various companies which will derive the competencies needed for the labor market. In between, you have OpenCourseWare, content, you have MIT, Coursera, all these things, Knowing where my competencies are and knowing that those are my destination competencies, how can I navigate the learner through different course pathways? That's what the platform can do. So this is how we think about new opportunities, flexible pathways from where you are to where you go, informed by learning science, and so on. So that's a sort of the path. And similarly, one for learning language. There are lots of applications that have come to make learning a better enterprise. So I'll talk about this one thing and conclude. This is not today's AI program, but it was launched in the heyday of after the task force, so about 5 years ago, let's say. This is a MicroMasters program. Have any of you heard of the MicroMasters program from MIT? So think about this because it can have great implications. So the MicroMasters program in an area, let's say it is financial management, is a set of 5 online courses. Online courses that anybody in the world can take, right? If you want credentials, there might be some fees, but anybody can go and take those courses, MIT courses. Now, depending on your performance, you might choose to say that, look, I've done performance and there's some criteria to do 1 semester at MIT or any one of those 100 participating institutions to get a terminal degree in that subject if it exists. For instance, you could do the supply chain management was the most popular MicroMasters. You could do the supply chain management MicroMasters, and then you might say, okay, I'll do that. You could come and spend 1 semester. So you have to imagine, 1 semester is 1/4 the cost, 1/4 the time invested to come if you are interested in the terminal degree. Turns out, everyone is not interested in the terminal degree. I might be working for Walmart and say, go do that stuff. And so the options are open, but I'll tell you why I bring up this example, not just because it provides alternate pathways, but look at what this has done. First of all, it says that if you want to learn in these areas, okay, whether it's finance or developmental economics or this thing, you don't have to go to that institution. You do not have to be admitted to the institution in order to learn the subject. Learn at that level. 2, it says that that's the credential is learned. you can get nowadays you all talk about micro-credentials, right? You can get these online credentials, and guess what? The market is voting with its feet. People who got online credentials, the Walmarts, the IBMs, they're all hiring them, recruiting them, so they value that. So what you're saying is that the connection between the institute, the individual, learning, and credential is suddenly opened up. You can have multiple pathways. That's structural disruption and creates new opportunities. And that's the future that we're all, which is why we're able to come up with different kinds of solutions for different kinds of learners, situations, rural education, employee-based education, particular skills, etc. And this is what is my sort of closing saying, the future that we think about is a network learner, is that the structural relationship, things that we have held as immutable is no longer immutable. And the realization first came when we did open education. John Daniels was the vice chancellor of the Open University in England, and he would talk about the iron triangle between access, cost, and quality. We used to believe that if you had great access, the quality will be lousy. If you had great quality, it will be very expensive. And suddenly open education says, no, you could have great access without great cost or without diminishing quality. It became a structural disruption. This is the possibility that we hope for. And the future says, so here are some design considerations as we think about the future. Some of this is there, right? And we've talked about this. Keep that in mind. And I want you to ponder on this as I leave you thinking about, if we are changing the world of learning for all learners, with all these new affordances, with what we have learned about learning, leveraging the ecosystem, all these supply things, how can we do this? Thank you very much. I'm happy to have you all. You probably want to get up.
No sé si tienen preguntas, si alguien tiene preguntas, comentarios que quieran hacer. Preguntas, ¿sí?
Hi, thank you very much for that amazing presentation. That was incredible. I have a couple of questions, but I just want to ask one particularly in terms of what you showed. There is so much diversity, so many resources, so many options that we have as faculty. So what's your advice for us? Like, where do we start so we can become learners in this modern era, and also how we facilitate the learning experience of our students in our institution, in a country such as Colombia, at a public institution where there are so many people with so much background, diversity, etc. So really I'm seeking your advice in this new era.
Yeah, it's a tough question and taller. Perhaps, I mean, I can, oh my God, I almost sat on this imaginary chair. So the first question is very, very important, because when I work with folks in thinking about strategy, it's really, really hard, important to think about what is the most important problem that you want to address now that's in front of you, okay? And then say, with this technology, whether it is AI, can that problem really be solved? Because we assume that there is a connection, that this is going to thing, and then say, who do I bring for help? How do I talk to my peers and my colleagues to do that? And I'll tell you why the first part is important about thinking, what is it, the big, each one of those innovations that I pointed to, this thing, and it happened because the faculty members, people like us, looked at and say, my student is struggling with this. Perhaps if I create this visualization app, they can understand it better, right? So they go to address that problem, and then there are people, and then you say, oh my God, it has implications for that. Maybe it points to the fact that I'll tell you, I did AI develop intelligent tutors. This was the work that was going on with Minsky and Papert, et cetera, at MIT, but I was in UMass. The first set of things that we developed was something called Buggy at MIT. It was an AI intelligent tutor, But the idea was to, because we saw kids making the same pattern of mistakes in math problems. So we wanted to get to the conceptual misunderstanding that led to that thing. So looking at what is, sometimes Haynes, we were talking about a colleague of ours called Haynes, who created Java applets called mathlets. Why he created this was because his students in the math class never saw any connection between the math they were learning and what was happening in the factories. So he started creating applets which show connection between that and statistical sampling in the thing. So it's always, the genesis is a problem in front of you at an individual level, at a learner level, or at an institutional level. You know? So I think the priority part becomes very important. The second thing is not to assume that what we have, whether it's the current state of AI or this thing, will actually address that problem, but to check it out. So experiment, check.
Yo quiero complementar porque iba a hablar en español, no sé, mirando aquí el vicerrector, pero en MIT tenemos dos recursos disponibles a los profesores. Una es I'm going to talk about TLL.
Of course.
El laboratorio de enseñanza de aprendizaje que hace mucho apoyo con los profesores, con los monitores y todos los estudiantes nuevos profesores en la universidad. Uno, en todo el tema de pedagogía, integrar todo el tema de neurociencia, de cómo aprenden las personas. Una cosa muy importante es hacer evaluación de sus propios cursos, o sea, qué métricas y qué datos tengo que recoger yo para saber que yo estoy haciendo, cumpliendo los objetivos que tengo. Y en nuestra oficina, que es Open Learning, que es, reporta al chancellor, no sé, el chancellor es como el rector, pero nosotros tenemos presidente y rector. También tenemos una oficina que se enfoca, se llama Residential, se enfoca en el aprendizaje como el FLIP, también en neurociencia, pero haciendo todo el uso de construir sus cursos en línea para apoyar el aprendizaje que pasa o beneficiarse del tiempo que tiene presencial. Entonces, hay esos recursos en la universidad, no sé si, o sea, trabajar muy de la mano con pedagogía, ¿no? Para entender, o sea, para comunicar cuáles son los intereses, qué puede la vicerrectoría apoyar, ¿no? Entonces hay esos recursos también en la universidad que pueden ser como
So actually, and I want to follow up on that also, because you asked, there were two layers to your question. You're saying in Colombia there are so many things going on and some stuff. I'll tell you from our experience. So it's very important to, whether it is through grants, to incentivize experiments. I cannot, okay, amongst faculty, but give them support. Most, you know, I've been on the other side myself. It's not about just giving stipends. It's about giving support. Is there an educational tech, is there a learning scientist with you? She mentioned TLL, to have that. But to do that experiments and to support that, and then building community based on that. I would set up galleries, inviting other colleagues. When we did that teal room, we'd have people from different departments would go observe to see how does that, what does it mean for what I teach? Is it possible? So that's one thing. The second thing, and this is very, very critical, because see, there are lots of initiatives. So you saw all those projects and active learning. Once I was in this academic advisory meeting when our chancellor said, oh, but you know, these projects, they die. Sustainability, you know, they go away. And I said, well, think about this. Active learning, right? We did about 15 projects under the umbrella of active learning, from visualizations to project-based learning experiences. Not all of them had the same level of success or survival. Some of them are contained for a class, some of them are institutional. But guess what? Active learning became in the DNA of teaching at MIT. So you see, when I say priorities, priorities are what are the directions that you want to take for the course, for the institute. And you might do a variety of projects under the direction, but somebody has to watch so that they don't become things in themselves, but they are speaking to the direction.
¿Alguna otra pregunta?
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. In your last slide, you talked about an irreversible structural change in the dynamics of education, right? And you see a scenario where the university of the higher learning education disappears somehow, because we have that a lot of resources, a lot of changing dynamics, a lot of self-learning, and a lot of tools concentrating, distributing all the resources, the knowledge, and how to articulate in a model like you suggest here. But I have asked myself if the university of as a guardian of knowledge is really disappearing rather than evolving.
Yeah, that's this question became very paramount after COVID also, when people were listening. So here's two ways to that I think about it. One is, I'll make a slight joke, because there was this book called The Drifters many years ago. It was a very 60s book, and there was a question in the book: is God dead? And the answer was no. He's living under an assumed name somewhere else. So, but the point is this: what we are forced to think about, suddenly when we say, is what is the role of the university, given the stuff that these kinds of learning, what is the special things that we'll do? Because we know contact is important, community is important. There are some things that we have to inculcate. So, but we have to not poo-poo that question, but think about it deliberately and saying, if people are coming here, how can I maximize the effectiveness of their visit here? What are the special things that they cannot get there? So we have to go through that exercise, restate, redefine, rearticulate our role in light of this. The second thing, which is related to the first one or a derivative, is I don't think the university goes away. Okay, the university has a mission. Sometimes there's an agro mission, but it might manifest and implement its mission with a different structure. Right? It might say that my university remedial programs are done through distributed mentors who are available online. The lab for this thing is there. So suddenly the functions that are the learning functions can be distributed, structured differently. Okay? The overall function doesn't go away. You did not have the choice before. Now you have the choice, and you can make a strategic choice under what conditions. Now, if you want to go further down and imagine possibilities, sometimes we dream, saying, if somebody, let's say, graduating, if you want to graduate from MIT, you could say that it is necessary that in the course of 4 years, you have visited at least 3 of the sister campuses. We don't have. But you could recompose your graduation. It's like a swimming requirement to make sure that you stay there, you stay. Of course, it has implications. How do you fund that, resource that? Even when we had relationship with MIT Cambridge, sometimes there's impedance mismatch, cultural mismatch, but the way you teach, you have to work out. But if you think that kind of international exposure is very important, you reconstruct the learning experience. What I'm saying is that there are possibilities now of rethinking how you execute your mission, right? Which we did not. And this allows you to do that. You can, and some of these we'll see, stackable credentials. You say these things you can do over there and come over here, because everything is not tied to, it's not so tied to class.
I don't know if you mentioned NEET as an experiment.
No, go.
Una de las cosas que está haciendo MIT para también experimentar, porque cuando empezamos como un énfasis grandísimo y un task force que hubo en MIT para pensar el futuro de la educación de los estudiantes, sobre todo de pregrado en ingeniería, y se reunió como la comunidad educativa a hacer recomendaciones. Los estudiantes llegaban, decían, bueno, si yo puedo tomar el curso en línea, ¿por qué voy a venir al campus? Y el rector les decía, ¿qué es lo que la universidad ofrece? Porque igual que MIT, la universidad ofrece unos recursos, una infraestructura que no tendrían. Entonces sí hay carreras que tal vez pueden irse en línea, hay unos micromasters que también pueden pensarse en línea, pero hay ciertas carreras imposibles de repensar, ¿no? De pensar que un estudiante va a tener la misma experiencia educativa si no tiene acceso. Y además lo que significa el ecosistema que trae la universidad, o sea, los exalumnos, y nosotros pensamos mucho desde lo que estamos haciendo con Pascual Bravo en Early Childhood, pero también en otro trabajo que hemos hecho en High School, o sea, cuál es el Real World Learning, cuáles son las alianzas que está trayendo la universidad. Y un experimento que sale de ese Task Force es repensar la educación en ingeniería para que no sea un silo, no sé si silo es como se dice, un silo como ingeniería mecánica, ingeniería aeroespacial, computación, que no sean silos, sino que el estudiante, y es una propuesta que empezó como una opción, empezó como un piloto, ahora es una opción, los estudiantes pueden hacer su carrera común y corriente o pueden entrar, se llama NEET, N-E-E-T, si quieren buscarlo, tienen la opción de entrar, se llaman threads, entonces son más enfocados a, cosas de actualidad, clima, cambio climático y sostenibilidad. Entonces los estudiantes entran de varias ingenierías, incluso ahora entran de otras escuelas, o sea, está humanidades, está negocios entrando, trabajan todo el tiempo como grupo para resolver problemas en cambio climático y se gradúan de todas maneras como ingeniero mecánico, como accedieron. Entonces, como repensar la universidad es importante, pero definitivamente hay no negociables en una universidad como MIT, pero que se parece muchísimo a Pascual Bravo en términos de su fortaleza como universidad.
This is, I'll apologize for, this is a bit of a show off, but but your question reminded me when I was talking about you have to really rethink what it is. So I didn't talk about this picture over here. This is me, a younger me, which looks like the older me, but, this was when I was at Mount Holyoke College. So one of the things that I was able to create is something called the 5 college course catalog, right? That is all the 5 colleges, and it was the days, Gopher was a system that was there. It was built using Gopher so that all the 5 college people could share. By the way, that catalog still lives. When I took my son for admissions, visits, it was somebody said, we have a 5 college course catalog. I said, yeah, I know, because, but the fact is this, what is to do is run a symposium with the history faculty in the campuses to think about the internet and its implications. But coming out of that, so this was the Northampton newspaper, which interviewed me. And one of the things at that time I said, look, I can see, so this is 92, 93, this interview was done. And I said, I can see very clearly when all courses will be available online, and we have to think, the question then becomes, what are we going to do on campus? Why would people come on campus? So that's that was a question at that time. It's quoted, if you read this article, I had said that, so, we know OpenCourseWare came in 2000, but I was saying, look, openly courses will be available, but it will beg the question of what is it, why will they come here? And at that time, I also foolishly believed that people will come for the libraries, because they were this thing, and people will come for the community, of course, which still exists. But the question is now very, very valid. And you can say, why would people come to a campus, to this campus, or to any place to co-locate? We have to answer that question as we think about it.
Algo que se me olvidó también que la universidad puede hacer y también está disponible es repensar la educación, ¿no? Entonces MIT está lanzando, empezó hace un par de años, pero ahora nuestro rector se salió a hacer esa investigación y se llama NIE, New Education Institution, o sea que la universidad no tiene que replicar, o sea, cada institución educativa tiene una misión y una visión, ¿no? MIT está pensando en resolver los problemas más grandes del mundo, y para eso tiene una infraestructura, un acceso a fondos, colaboración con el gobierno, con la empresa privada, etcétera, ¿no? Entonces, esa experiencia es única, pero MIT sí sabe cuáles son las cosas de impacto. Vijay hablaba de action learning, que es importante. Ese es uno de los elementos, pero la universidad en paralelo está pensando cuál es la institución educativa del futuro, y hay una iniciativa que involucra a muchas personas en repensar. Alternativas, eso no quiere decir que la Universidad de MIT va a desaparecer, pero alternativas.
Okay, thank you, Claudia. Mr. Kumar, thank you for your presentation. I have a question related to what Claudia was saying about government cooperation in a comic tone, because given the current situation in the US, I remember when I was doing my master's that when you enroll for programs or courses such as aircraft design in countries which belong to NATO, some students from Pakistan or North Korea or Middle Eastern countries cannot enroll in those courses because the government forbids it for security reasons. That was 10 years ago. Probably it's still going on. And today we are seeing the US government barring international students or trying to bar international students from enrolling in US universities for political reasons. Is it a concern of yours that political barriers will hinder the penetration of education, and how do you think we can future-proof education from political conflicts or political barriers?
So this is this thing. I mean, the general question is, if we exclude the rich, sort of fabric of students that have come in, we all stand to lose, because it's a big, it's a big cauldron which generates ideas. That's why I came. In fact, sometimes there were people would say, "Oh, you must have come here for economic opportunity." I'm a 70s kid. I was an idealist. I didn't know what economic opportunity meant, but I know what future studies, and I couldn't do it there. So this is a place that you generate new ideas. She goes there, she does a PhD with Seymour Papert. I mean, that kind of aspiration that you can chase your dreams, it allowed there. So there are two ways of answering. I won't do a politically correct answer. But the thing is, you have to create the enablements so that the kinds of situations that led to current barriers don't happen. So there's responsibility everywhere. That's in terms of making sure that you create the enablement so that people come in, that any system that is created every system will get abused sometime, but not to a large part abused. And this thing, I am an optimist. I think if we continue to make the compelling case for the value, okay? In all negotiation, people do the extreme positions first, right? I mean, I come from a bartering society. If the shopkeeper says $5, I say 5 paise, immediately. And then somewhere in the middle you'll meet, I think the extreme positions have been asserted, and I think which pushes us to articulate our compelling value of having people from different countries, different societies come and do it in an economically viable, provide that kind of education economically viable, because it's some settling. Now, if I go back further out and say, well, it might mean that you have more places around the world, offering the kinds of excellent opportunities that largely the United States offered before. And, so those are all things to hope for. And so in this thing, my tendency is to, after I've said bad guys, good guys, my tendency is to say, look, forget about bad guys, good guys. What can we do constructively? So if we treat this whole situation as an innovation diffusion problem, I think it's very clear that we haven't made a compelling case for the mix, the kinds of institutions, compelling enough case, okay, that everybody understands, that all the taxpayers understand, the politicians understand. So it behooves us to make that case compelling. No? I think that's why, if we care about the enterprise, I think that's what we have to do. But you cannot, this is in a class. You want a mix in a class, because there's a, we thrive with that kind of a mix, bringing disparate ideas and being challenged. So that's why we are all in this business, Yeah. It's a reckoning time. It's I think, all over the world, by the way, all over the world.
O sea, como para complementar el tema de resiliencia es importante, ¿no? Antes de digamos, este momento que estamos viviendo en los Estados Unidos con el gobierno, un par de años atrás hubo una demanda que empieza también con Harvard, interesante, por admisiones y el tema de mérito académico versus una admisión que busca pues, una representación del demográfico que existe en los Estados Unidos, ¿no? Entonces, la consecuencia para MIT es en admisión un reverso de unos 20, 30 años, pero en lugar de decir, bueno, con eso estamos, la universidad empieza a buscar una forma diferente de encontrar esos estudiantes y así como hicimos progreso, obviamente nos vamos a demorar otros 30 años, pero pues vamos a aprender de otras universidades porque ya en California habían vivido una situación parecida y las universidades empiezan a trabajar juntas. Entonces yo digo que como con el tema de esperanza que nos habla Vijay, es como darle la vuelta, porque sí hay un compromiso increíble desde MIT, por eso hablaba del proyecto del New Education Institution, es el compromiso de obviamente servirnos a esos estudiantes, pero parte de lo que Vijay y yo venimos haciendo es cómo tomar lo que MIT ha hecho bien y poder trabajar con otros aliados en el mundo para llevar esa educación, esas oportunidades al mundo, ¿no? Entonces, yo veo ese commitment también aquí, los animo a pensar cómo logramos pues darle esas oportunidades a los jóvenes del mañana, a los líderes de mañana.
And yeah, one final statement I'll make about this, maybe to close. So why we shared this, why I talk about, there'll be, more questions, is the thing is, for instance, from the World Education Lab, we have people come, we engage with them, and they'll say, the idea is not to create more MITs around the world. MIT is its students and its faculty. That's why sometimes people will come and say, I'll take one of those, two of those, three of those. MIT is not an integration of those things, right? Which is why we said this is how we thought. Was the process. So think about the process. Use that to create your own excellent learning environment, And we will all, as educators, succeed if there are many such excellent, and it is sort of happening, which are different, which are defined by their own uniqueness, their own special sauce. So that all you can do is say, this is how we thought, how we made strategic choices, and this is how we changed, negotiated change. Now you do your thing. Sorry, please. No. I hope I didn't.
I thought it was a question
Oh,
here.
okay.
¿Una final o cerramos? Bueno, mil gracias a todos.
Thank you very much.
por
Muchas
estar
gracias.
aquí.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.